Moments. I'm Marcus Meek. I'm here with Pastor Jentezen Franklin, and we have a special guest today. We're so excited about Dr. Fleming, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about mental health. She's a licensed psychologist, a consultant, executive coach. She focuses primarily on pastors, Christian businesses, corporations, leadership development, on and on. She's married for 18 years, 2 children, and she is going to be such a blessing to you over these next few minutes. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Pastor, you want to talk to us a little bit about how you guys know each other?
Absolutely, yeah. Many of you have heard us talk about different things on this podcast, that challenges that we faced in ministry, in our own lives, in our own families. And Dr. Michelle Fleming was a person that I believe was put in our lives by the Lord, because we were in desperate need of help, and still are in many ways. But, during COVID, life hit hard, so many people, so many families. And I began to hit situations in our own family that I didn't have the answers for, didn't know where to turn, didn't know what to do. We had family in crisis, and especially in the area of mental health. And we went to John Townsend. I'm still trying to remember.
That's how we were introduced.
Yeah. How did I meet him, and how did all that happen? And I'm sure Sharice would know exactly. But we went to him, and he then realized, that we were mostly in Georgia. He lives out on the West Coast, and of course he co-wrote the book with Dr. Cloud.
Yeah, right, Henry Cloud.
Boundaries.
Right.
And he immediately told us that he highly recommended you on the East Coast because you were based out of Atlanta. And the things that she has done for Sharice and I and our family in helping us, I had no idea the impact and the good that could come out of having somebody you can turn to in ministry and in life. And they're expert at giving you step-by-step structure and process of bringing your life back together after it's kind of imploded.
Yeah.
And that's what you meant to us. And so
Thank you.
We were talking, my wife and I, Sharice, and she loves you so much, and she wanted you to get your message out there, because her heart is really for pastors' wives that feel so isolated, so alone, so in a glass house. And you are supposed to have a perfect everything, perfect mother, perfect family,
That's
perfect marriage, perfect kids, and all of it. So with all of that said, thank you for who you are, what you do, and we're delighted you're here. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your own journey into the place where you are today in mental health and helping so many people.
Sure, I will. And let me also say, in working with you, Pastor, and your family, I found you so open and just, open to understanding and open to learning new ways. And that is just the key for making progress with any sort of counselor, or when you're getting mentorship, is just that teachable, open heart. So that makes a big difference.
Thank you.
And people like me love to work with people that are open and non-defensive in that way.
Well, I think too, your qualifications, just quite frankly, I think someone who is a pastor, and especially if they've had some level of success at doing what they're trying to do, if they're going to submit and listen to someone, number one, it meant to me, I need to know that you have a Christian worldview and come from biblical foundations in counseling. That was critical to me. And the second thing was, I needed to know that this person is highly recommended by someone I respect, and someone who knows you and your life. And, that was Dr. Townsend in this case, which meant a lot, because that's a big deal. You don't know where to turn. In ministry, I honestly, I couldn't go. I talked to him on a personal level about just about anything. But other than that, you're just talking with colleagues and stuff. And so, and the last thing though that I would say that made me feel peace about bringing my family to you was your qualifications. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your qualifications. I think it makes people pay attention more, quite frankly.
Sure, absolutely. So I started out in my career life in sales for a high-tech firm, doing a lot of traveling and having tons of people reporting to me all across North and South America, and had that feeling, well, burnout, I guess we would describe it now, of like, there's got to be more than this. I feel like I'm meant for more than this. And I'd always been interested in the field of psychology. But what I discovered is that you could actually go and get training that was integrated with a Christian worldview. So at the time I was in Southern California, and Biola University is training Christian therapists. There's several others that are out there also doing it. And I realized I can actually integrate my faith into my daily job and what I want to do. So I went on to get a master's and a PhD at Biola. And that is where, through a colleague, I met Dr. Jentezen, and then started working with his area because I had been in business. I'd worked for the church for a time when I was a young adult. It was a good match, and that he had his dissertation professor was my dissertation professor, so that part was kind of fun, knowing that he had studied under the same way and studied the same research in attachment and ego psychology and just the things that we need to kind of strengthen us and get us through these difficult times. So I worked with John for several years there in California. He has conferences along with Henry Cloud called Ultimate Leadership, where you can fly into California and work with them for a week at a time. It's very like an intensive, 1 week intensive for pastors. And for Christian business owners, also for other counselors, Christian counselors. And he needed folks to come in and help run groups there. So I did that for him for many years before relocating back here to the South, which is where I'm from. So met my Southern California born and bred husband and drug him back here. So that was quite a 4-year negotiation in our marriage, but made it back here and then started private practice of just, again, kind of working with the same demographic in the heart for really impacting leaders, because when you impact the leader, then he sets the culture for everything else that's happening.
Very good.
That's absolutely happened. His getting into counseling got me into counseling, got my children into counseling.
Oh, wow.
It has been really helpful.
Well, there's really
so it is when it does the leadership, it does kind of, okay, maybe if he's doing, I should probably be thinking about this too, because I'm more messed up than he is.
but no, but there is a stigma, sort of, in ministry that you're supposed to have it all together in every area all the time, and I also think that there's a misconception that there's nothing wrong with not waiting until you're in a crisis to have somebody that you can go to discuss the heaviness of life, or just how are you doing? Because we don't really check up on each other. We have the metal to the pedal, or vice versa, whatever it is, and we're going. It's Christmas is coming up, and Thanksgiving is coming up, and there's this, there's that, and so when do we ever stop and recharge our batteries, and how do we do that? And so maybe. And it doesn't require you being in a burnout, stressed out, messed up place to need help, or even have I really see it as accountability in my marriage, in my family. I'm being accountable to somebody who would tell me not what I want to hear. I have a lot of people that would say that. I hope I really try to surround myself with people who will push back on me. Because I think that's important. Because we get stupid, we get arrogant, we get disillusioned, and if we don't watch it. And it's good to have somebody that I got to go. My wife and I are going to this person, and she's going to spill all the beans of anything that I'm not doing that is not honoring or really what I would call being a Christian leader, right?
Our spouses do that for each other, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Do that for us, I mean.
So how do let's just delve in here.
Sure.
Like, how do you recognize signs that maybe you should be getting some help, and how does that process start?
Yeah, great question. So I believe all of us have an intuition that know when something's a little off. So the signs would be kind of what we say, everything inside of our skin, that we know we're feeling really anxious, even if other people can't see it, or really revved up, kind of running thoughts, can't sleep well at night, nervousness feeling. That would be kind of what anxiety, some things that anxiety feels. Or we know that we are just slogging through it. We're just fatigued and down. Doesn't matter how much caffeine or how much sleep you get. And you've just kind of lost the enjoyment that you used to get out of doing ministry or even, time with your family. Like you're having a hard time finding joy in the things that you do. Again, you might have the mask on, no one else can tell. So that would be one sign, kind of checking in. The other sign could be other people coming to us saying, hey, I'm noticing ... We see that you're not doing as well, or I can tell you're kind of down, and just being open to that feedback that other people are noticing. And then the final place I'd say it probably leaks out would be like in our behaviors. If you have behaviors that are not healthy, they're becoming destructive, but you can't stop them. Like, well, I'll know up here what to do. It's the actual application of how to change. That's the challenging part. That's what, people like me specialize in. How do I actually apply it to my specific situation? So I would look for those sort of indicators, kind of the personal, the relational, people around us, and behaviors.
And feel free, Marcus, to jump in. But what are the top things that you see in pastors and leaders now that you would say are flashing red lights on the dash? Warning signs, basically.
And there's a lot of pastors out there who are having those flashing warning signs. So number one challenge, I would say, is isolation. Yeah, that they're the pastor everywhere, right? They're the pastor and not the person.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the person might be worried or fearful, but the pastor can't show that, right? And the person might be struggling in their relationship with their marriage or have a child that's struggling, but the pastor can't say that.
Wow.
So they get isolated. And then the second one would be the tremendous amount of expectation that can be put on a pastor from the congregation and maybe even from staff,
really
where
good.
they have to be perfect. Some pastors, I like to call it high levels of excellence. Some people call it perfectionism, but we all have a little bit of that, right, to do well at what you're doing. But when you get that from other people, that you have to be perfect, then, any sort of, I said this wrong or did this wrong or this person was upset. And now with social media, it gets amplified. So you put those two things, the isolation with the focused attention on any imperfection, and that's kind of the perfect storm.
That's so true. What you just said, social media, it in so many ways is like magnifies everything about, especially in ministry. If you have haters, if you have people who just they can take the cheap shots at you, at your kids, at your family, at your everything about you, and they can stay hidden in the shadows. And it's a tough world. Sharice and I were talking with a pastor's wife just recently, just in like the last week or so, and she just opened up, this pastor's wife, and she just said that there's just certain people in the congregation who feel like they're just able to say whatever they want to say about anything that concerning her family, her children, and she's trying to walk that tightrope of, you really have no right, but they are kind of old school and kind of older people in the church that feel like they have a right to just kind of say whatever they want to say. How do you build boundaries around your family and ministry or in leadership to where there is sacred, holy ground that I will fiercely defend my family. My family is my family, and I will defend my family over the. Yeah, this is very hard for me to say because I love the church, but I love my family, and I believe the call of God and the church is part of that. But I don't think people have a right to cross certain lines because I'm just like them. I'm a human being, and I have struggles. We have struggles too.
Yeah. Yeah. So building that boundary is basically that protection space around them. And because they do get drugged through both that isolation and all eyes on them with you. So certainly one boundary would be protecting family time in general, making sure that you have time as a family that's away from the church and church activities.
Break that down a little bit. So what do you think? Because this is a real issue with pastors that they just feel like, especially, I'm blessed now that I have an amazing staff that can but it took me years and years and years, and they know when I'm having a hard week. They know that the inside track. They know when I just need to focus on whatever. But I remember the years when I did not have that, and I care, and the wheels keep turning. I mean, Sunday keeps coming. Issues keep coming. And I know there are listeners right now that are right there, and they don't have the luxury of having a staff and like that, to that degree, or even relationships with the staff like that to that degree. So I don't know if I'm making sense. I know I'm real scattered, but I'm really trying to put myself back in 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, that I was so in need of help, but I couldn't reach out. And how do you start building those boundaries, even of time with your family?
Well, one of the first boundaries would be in your mind, so that when you're with your family, you shut a mental door on everything that's going on with the church. Because I think we've all probably experienced somebody being there but not there, being there physically, but the mind is, so that would be kind of one boundary around the mind. In terms of like setting the boundary both with the family and the congregation, reminds me when we first moved to California, we were looking for a church. We went to a small non-denominational church, and the pastor was showing on the screen a letter that his 7-year-old daughter had written that basically said, "Daddy, we miss you because you're never home."
Wow.
And he said, "We are now officially canceling Saturday night services."
Wow.
Because I have to have 24 hours where I am at home with my kids. And I thought, this is where I'm going. This is the church I want to attend.
You can follow somebody like that.
I can follow someone like that.
That's so good.
Yeah, that spirit of leadership in the home.
Now listen, think of that quality person family sitting out there. And it wasn't the man's strength that made you want to follow him. It was his vulnerability and weakness that you could relate to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, and later, as we were attending, in passing, giving a message, he said, "And my therapist said," and then just kept talking. And it wasn't about his therapist. I was like, that is so amazing. Again, imagine what that does to just lower the stigma. I'm imperfect. You guys are imperfect. You're not here worshiping me. We're worshiping Jesus together in some aspect, right?
Whoa.
And obviously it was open to therapy. That was before I was a therapist. I was still in training. So yeah, that is one way. You just show people the vulnerability and the why, and you set the boundary, and they can handle it. The congregation can handle it. It's also not fragilizing the congregation. Like I have to be all things to all people. I have to keep everyone happy. That's that pressure that the pastors are under, and kind of just stepping through that, saying I can be authentic and be myself and show the stress lines a little. There's a stress line happening in my family, and I got to at times prioritize them.
So good. I know in what you're saying, for me personally, one of the things I found out when I went to counseling was I guess I'm a codependent. I guess a lot of people that go into our type of work are.
Sure, yep.
And I didn't understand that's actually a negative. And that's what ends up messing us up a lot, is we go in to help people because somehow we're trying to resolve an incomplete, issue from maybe our childhood or whatever, and we're trying to finish the story loop, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, when you start getting into it, you realize like how you think that if you're not the hero, that everything falls apart. That if you're not the strong one, if you're not the one with, and almost like you're trying to protect everybody from the fact that you're just a person, like you're just a normal person that that can't always be up, that can't always be strong, that can't always be happy,
Right.
that can't always, and you're tired, you're exhausted, you're fatigued, you want to quit, you want to give up, but you can't really tell people that kind of stuff. But to kind of hear what you guys are saying, and what I've started to learn is, whether it's my family or my kids or even the church, in a way that is appropriate, you have to say, hey, I'm not Superman at all. And so what would you say, because I think the challenge for me was I thought that biblically, that mental health and all those kind of things, like if I'm spiritually right, if I just fast, if I just pray, if I just, then these other issues will work out. But they didn't work out. No matter how I prayed more, fasted more, and I'd go back to the same prayer place and say, God, you not fix that. You're not fixing that.
Yeah.
What else am I supposed to do? How I've read the book on this, and I've read this on that, and I've gone to listen to this podcast or this teaching or this series or studied this person that's the expert. And I did everything they said. It's not fixing whatever it is that's broken. So I, maybe help pastors like me out there that struggle to see why is it so important that we have somebody that we're going to. If we don't, how do we find that person? Where do we find someone like you? I know you're busy, so a lot of people can be like, hey, how do we get
Sure.
information? You're going to say, well, I can't. But I don't know, help us, because to find that person is so hard.
So hard, yeah. And as we were talking beforehand, I want to offer definitely resources. I'm going to have a free ebook on my website that you can download at Dr. Michelle Fleming, Dr. Michelle Fleming, 1 L and Michelle, 1 M and Fleming. And that'll be a list of resources of everything we talk about on this podcast, but also how to find Christian counselors and all the different organizations out there that have Christian counselors and resources for pastors. So the question, first I want to affirm, yes, of course, prayer and fasting does help, right? And reading scripture and living a life of virtue, all of those things do help. But is that sign right there that you said is I'm doing all these things and it's not getting better, right? There's a blind spot. There's something I can't figure out. That's what got me interested in counseling and in my own counseling journey is that it wasn't working out the way I had thought and everything. Actually, for me, it was around kind of dating and finding a marriage partner. And I had a whole list of all the books, and I was going to the singles group at the church, and I started a singles group at the church and the whole thing, and it wasn't working. I read the book Boundaries in Dating by Cloud and Townsend and realized okay, I can take this and bring this into my personal life and find someone that how the book talks about how do I apply it to my personal life, my specific environment, but what I bring to it. So let's say in the book, it can tell you, hey, do this certain thing or say this certain thing. But if I'm really anxious and say it in an anxious way, that's going to come off a certain way. If I'm defensive, that's going to come off a certain way. Well, who in my life is going to tell me I'm doing that, this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where I'm keeping myself isolated? That's where in that alone in the room, you can get that feedback. You can get that kind of outside opinion, also from a Christian worldview of where you're tripping yourself up, where you're kind of getting in your own way. So I would say what counseling and good mentorship brings is the tools of how to do it. When you go to the Bible, that's the who and the why. And when you go to counseling, that's like the how. And just 200 years ago, we didn't know how to treat cancer. You certainly wouldn't only try to pray cancer away. You would probably still go get your tests done and talk to a medical professional. And the field of, medical diagnosis has improved. Well, that's what's happened in the past 200 years. We understand more how the mind works, and we can understand how to treat the mind. We can understand what's happening in the feelings and what helps resolve anger and unforgiveness and resentment and trauma and healing from sins that happen to us that might have nothing to do with our own behaviors.
It's very good. Even grief of losing
Absolutely.
a child, or does the Bible address mental health? Is it in the scriptures that how do you marry the two of the world of psychology and human behavior and the Word of God?
Yeah. Great question. So, being made in the image and likeness of God, and we are His creation by the study of who we are and how He designed us, that is the study of God. That is learning. So, for instance, He has designed us for attachment. And I'm sure, as you may have heard the studies, you can feed a baby and keep a baby warm, and if you don't hold and attach that baby, the baby will die. They were having babies dying in orphanages in other parts of the world just because they were so busy they weren't held. So you actually are made and driven for attachment. So those sort of things, like understanding that God clearly made us for attachment for Himself. The verse, the greatest commandment comes to mind is, to love your Lord your God with your heart, your mind, and your soul.
Wow.
So the soul is there, right? The mind, it's going to be hard to love God if our mind is running with these anxious thoughts, right? And how do you praise the Lord when you can't stop crying, because your heart is broken? So I see psychology is not there to replace, the Bible or Jesus' word. Is there to support you in that. In a way, our mental health is almost a way of witnessing to the Lord. If He tells us love is patient and kind, I am not patient and kind all the time. I need to learn how to be patient and kind. As Christians, if we're going to be different, that's how people are going to see us be different, right? I might have the fish sticker on my car, but when I go to work, am I that patient, kind, gentle, not self-centered person? Am I living that out? And when I can't, I can go to someone to talk through, like, how can I deal with these struggles, and how can I deal with this difficult person potentially in my life?
I love that about the mind and the heart. Love Him with all of your mind. How do you love God with your mind and I love what you said about broken hearts, because there are so many people whose hearts have been broken, and sooner or later, life does not turn out like you thought it would. And so can we take a deeper dive into that? Like, how do you restore or renew your mind? What can you do if you've been through something, you feel burnout, you feel used up, you feel weary, you feel frustrated and heartbroken? How do you recover from that?
Yeah. So the field of psychology approaches the mind in two different ways. Some believe that your thoughts create your feelings, and some believe that your feelings create your thoughts. It's probably a little bit of both. From the angle that I'm trained and practice in, it's very strong emphasis on like our attachments and our relationships. And so healing normally is, we're normally injured within a relationship, and so many times healing needs to come from a relationship, right? So it's us and God, but it's also kind of horizontal. So that, now I don't want to scare people off, but some people say that all therapy is grief therapy, because there is the losses that we're working through.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a loss of how I thought things were going to turn out, what I thought I could control, right? What I thought I was doing right. The necessary losses we go through in life, simply getting older. There's a loss there. And so we have all these defenses against loss, which are all those other feelings, the anger, the resentment. Sometimes anxiety is like the energy it takes to hold down other feelings we don't want to have. Grief hurts. It hurts physically, it hurts emotionally, actually can show up physically in our bodies in all sorts of ways. So of course we defend against it. So taking the opportunity to kind of peel those layers and letting that emotion come out is where you get the restoration. And sometimes grief, you have to almost do a 360 on grief, is what I like to call it. So because there's so many different angles, there's layers and layers, and it's not a one-time thing, right? The healing is not, as Dr. Townsend likes to say, healing's not a microwave, it's an oven. And we live in this microwave society. So it would, the healing comes from kind of the deep dive into what's happening in our hearts and being able to bring that to the Lord and someone else.
So I'm 61 years old, and I think we started coming to you maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I was 59, I guess, and never been to a counselor. We had a older minister, Bishop T.F. Tenney, who would speak to me and Sharice when we were really having struggles, and he and his wife. And he was so straight. He was such a straight shooter with me. It was just wonderful. And when he died, for several years, there was a real vacancy in our life to go to people that we could say anything to and say we're struggling. Sharice would call her and say, we're struggling. And a lot of times, it's raising a family too. As your family gets older, and you're not in control of their life. You're not in control of their decisions. You're not in control of the directions, and you're so used to being that authority and voice, and then you realize they have their own life, and it may or may not include your world and your church or all of those things. Fortunately, thankfully, all of mine have ultimately landed there. But boy, what a journey.
Yeah.
And I thank God for my family. I love them all so much, so proud of them all. But I also know that when I started coming to you, when Sharice and I, the other was more of a spiritual accountability and wonderful sounding board and biblical counsel and prayer. But with you, it was different. So I kind of want to build what to expect if somebody goes and reaches out to get help. Because I didn't know what to expect. I almost had the mentality, I'll do anything to have a better relationship with my wife.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is. I don't care who knows. I don't care. I want help for my family. I can't. The pain is too much, and it feels like that there's so much going on that we're going. Me and my wife Sharice are going, and it's like if we got together, we would end up in some kind of turmoil, and it was always usually somebody else, their battles, and it just stirred us up. So I guess what I'm trying to say is what I noticed about when I first went to you. Number one, the first time Sharice and I came, I felt hope. I saw a change in her because it meant something to her massively that I would be willing to come get help, that I genuinely was open and honest in those gatherings and meetings, that it meant it. I didn't get all of that when I went. I didn't realize what it meant to her too, because I needed it. And then I didn't realize how desperate I needed it. And I didn't even know I needed it. And I think that's where a lot of people are, because, we just do this for years and years and years. And I'm not like a, I always almost saw it as if there must be some kind of weakness or something in a person. It sounds so silly now, but those kinds of mentalities can really develop in your life. And you almost feel like that that could never be you. That's that other guy, that other couple, that other family. But when we started coming, number one, I'd feel better. When we would come to you, I'd feel better at the end. And we would be closer at the end every time, sometimes very intense discussions and things that, that were heart-wrenching and hard to say. And but we would feel, it's amazing, the load that would lift, the feeling of lighter. I feel lighter. I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful. I did not have a lot. I'm always a person of faith, and I know God can do anything. But I would feel lighter, and I would feel hopeful, and that is a big deal to somebody struggling and trying to be in ministry and carrying the load of a church and everything else. And then it was like what you triggered all that was you said it's like an onion. It's a peeling layer by layer. And you did several things that I noticed. You always had seemingly an agenda. You would even give us things before we would meet again that you ask us both to read, and even maybe a short, it would take 10 minutes, the whole stuff really, but it was enough to focus me and for the meeting even, and Because, and I don't know if I'm making sense, but I noticed that. And I noticed, too, that at the end, you always had a summary. And so that means I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do this. Just maybe 3 things like that. And that's what I think is missing. Like, you can go pray with people, you can go talk to people, but then there's those people like yourself who know how to take the mess. It's all over the place, bring it down to 2 or 3 root causes, and the light bulb goes off. That she's right. That is true. I do that. I am that. I have that. That is what we're doing. If it's a marriage thing that's causing trouble, right? Does that make sense? I mean, I want people to understand the value is not just to be going to a counselor, to just come in there and talk, but if it's a good one, they're going to give you some kind of structure and plan to work to get better.
That's right. And to take what feels like chaos,
absolutely,
and boil it down to these are the parts that need to change. We see it as like a whole system. We can see kind of what's causing the chaos and just bring it down to each person's personal responsibility. Because what I love what you said is that I wanted to go and get the help, and I was motivated. And I will encourage people to come when that pain is either more than you want to handle or is just getting in the way of what you want out of life. You can't come to change the other person. And I really had that sense in working with you, that you were, again, open in there. You were there out of love for your wife and for your family. And those are the motivators that get you into therapy and why good therapy happens and happens well. The second piece to expect when seeing a therapist is somebody that you feel is helpful. Not every therapist matches every person. So I would encourage people to interview a couple therapists. Most therapists will do like a 15 or 20 minute, if you don't have an introduction like we do, like a 15, 20 minute free consultation. Ask them about their qualifications, their worldview, their Christian worldview. If they're not a Christian, how do they feel about you being a Christian? And so make sure that match is there.
And I think that's so important, because what you always go to the cores of you don't you don't quote a lot of scriptures, but you go to the core of the truth. Everything, the principles that you give are always biblically based. As a preacher, I know that, because even though you're not saying it in like our world of saying it, the Bible says, but you are laying out principles,
right? Yes,
principles that are rock solid, and that's so important.
I would not try to tell you what the Bible says, so that's true. But drawing from that knowledge, along with kind of the study of creation, the study of relationships, and what happens when we get anxious about that attachment, why we are withdrawing, why we are attacking and criticizing, putting those pieces together and boiling them down to, I'm asking you to do this. The work in that hour is kind of like the consultation piece, but the couples that do well are the ones that do the work outside of the therapy room. Yeah, therapy isn't meant to last forever, right? It's meant to learn the tools here, practice them together, and then take them from here. So I would also say, to make sure that when you're going, it feels helpful to go, even sometimes when you feel like you don't want to.
Absolutely.
I like to describe therapy as like a massage for the brain. It's a privilege.
It's really
We're very privileged. The brain is just another muscle in your body, and it's like a massage for the brain. You also wouldn't go to the gym and try to build a bicep. Going 3 hours for 3 weeks, you're not going to have a bicep. You're going to be sore. So it's the consistency. Mm-hmm. So when you hear people say, "Oh yeah, I went to therapy, it didn't work," well, you went 6 weeks. How long is the gym going to work for you if you go for 6 weeks, right? It's consistency, and then you have a foundation, and you don't have to stay in forever. So really, it's just seeing I am getting help on another part of my physical body and part of my brain,
wow.
Yeah,
that's a great concept.
It's like
Well,
going
it
to a
is,
personal trainer,
yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
It is,
I'm taking up all the time, but I think too, like, so can we? And this is so unfair. I feel like to just do a hypothetical,
Sure.
but
Those are good.
but I think, like, okay, let's say you're a pastor and wife, and you got life hitting. Let's say you got stuff going on in the church. You got you and your wife are at a stress level and at each other, and it's not going well, and the children are doing their thing, and okay, so what can we do to help a marriage that's listening right now? And it's really bad, and they are doing the best they can. They love each other, they love God, they love their family, but they're really, really struggling. Maybe even the enemy is starting to creep in,
Sure.
and they need help.
Yeah.
They need help. Where do you start in your mind when somebody comes to you like that, and you understand a preacher's world, the public, all the things that they have to kind of juggle.
Yeah.
So how do you see that kind of person that's listening right now? How do you help them?
The first thing I would suggest is that they reach out for help, right? Hopefully, their church would have some referrals to some good therapists. And there's counseling centers at churches, there's counseling centers at Christian universities. So, and again, I'll list some references in that free ebook. There's a American Association of Christian Counselors. There's a bunch of different associations. The Townsend Institute is training counselors. So the first would be ask for help. And when you go get help, what to expect would be listening. That therapist should be able to listen because both of you need to be able to tell your story. The therapist isn't the referee or the traffic cop. As I always like to tell my couples, the relationship is my client. The relationship between the two of you, because I'm here for that. So if you need to be told something or you need to be told something to make that work, that's what we're doing here.
I think that's powerful because Sharice, she needed to know that. I love that the relationship is your customer or client, not one dominant personality or whatever. And that is a big deal, I think, to pastors' wives to know that there's somebody that will say whatever needs to be said and allow it to be said, and then deal with it.
Yeah, and underneath the things that need to be said is normally this deep longing to be close. I always go with the assumption there's a deep longing to be close. If that longing to be close is not there, then that's kind of different work. That's why you come before it gets to the part of crisis, before you start thinking about separating and divorce. If you're thinking that, definitely run as fast as possible. But it's also there beforehand. Again, you go to the gym before you get sick, right? You don't want to wait till you get sick to take care of, your health. And so that deep longing to be close is scary and vulnerable because this person is so important to me. We have tied our horses together and we have no other options except to stay together. So a good therapy will help kind of reduce those fears or reduce the person that is withdrawing just out of that fear and get underneath and remind the two of you of what it feels like to be close. And that would be the experience, is that you have it with each other. You can kind of find each other again and remember why you first got married. Or I like to say, hey, if you got married for the wrong reasons, you can stay together for the right ones. Yeah, even if you didn't have a honeymoon period, you can re-find it here. So you can expect to remember what it feels like to like being around your spouse again and
really
be able
good.
to have conversations without them, boiling over.
This is real controversial, I think, in certain worlds of Christianity. But are there times when you need the help of medicine
Oh, great
for
question.
mental health?
Yeah, great question. Again, looking at the brain is just another organ in the body. There are times that the brain itself is breaking down, and we call it like an organic functioning. For instance, schizophrenia is one of those diagnoses that has many times very little to do with the person's environment. It is an organic brain disorder. There's nothing that person did, there's nothing that family did to create that disease in many cases. Bipolar is very similar to that. So yes, there is a time and a place for the application of what we call psychotropic drugs to certain diagnoses. I would suggest definitely working with a psychiatrist who gives out medications and a psychologist at the same time. I don't prescribe, psychologists and counselors don't prescribe. And the research shows that the talk therapy in combination with the psychotropic drugs is the most effective. And so that the drug doesn't just become a Band-Aid that you stay on forever and that it's not kind of handed out, too easily. One example, my 90-year-old grandmother just became severely depressed, and she had never taken anything in her life. I tend to, because we don't prescribe, I don't overbelieve in that. It changed the last few years of her life, that for her to get on an antidepressant just really quickly, it was amazing. Sometimes it really works. I know probably what a lot of people see is that some people get stuck for years and they're switching the meds around and there's all these side effects and there can be complications to it. So that's why I would suggest making sure you're also getting good counsel at the same time.
It's very good.
It's so good. At lunch before this, Courtney was talking about, because we were just talking about how, like for us, every Monday at 1:00 is our counseling appointment. Well, and that's because that's my for sure day off, no matter what. But after Sunday, the last thing I want to do is go do that. And every time, it's like you dread, but it's like going to the gym. I work out. I've worked out for most of since I was a child. That's, but I don't ever wake up and say, I can't wait to get there. But I know the reward. I know what happens after. I know the endorphins. I know it helps me think lighter about heavy things. I know that piece of it. And Courtney was saying, she asked this question. She says, have you ever regretted it after? And counseling is that same way. Like you said, it gives you hope.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
It is such a good thing to force yourself into it, because you don't ever want to go. Like I'm not sitting here feeling warm and fuzzy. It's like, oh God, because who wants to go dig into all the.
I love you say that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
but I would have to confess, I was the same way every time. But it's like I dread this a little. Yeah, and then I was so glad afterwards. I was so glad. I can honestly say that. And to get me to sit down for. Sometimes ours much longer than an hour. Yeah. And to get me to do that is not because I'm anything special. It's just I can't even hardly sit here. Like physically, I feel like I'm about to. I know. But there is something to it. Come, let us reason together, the Scripture says, and especially when you have the counsel that people like Dr. Fleming bring. I love what you said earlier about couples, the deep desire to be close. Mm-hmm. That is the yearning in the hearts of many couples listening right now, and even the arguments and stuff, even the words spoken sometimes that are not good. It is really a crying out of, I want to be close to you. I want to be close to you, right?
That's right. Yeah, we call it separation protest, that you are protesting the separation you feel. And for some, it can come across as criticism and nagging and anger. And then for others, it's more of withdrawal and isolation, stonewalling, defensiveness. But underneath that is this cry that I need and want to be close, and we don't like that vulnerable feeling.
Somebody needs to hear that today, because that's life-giving, hope-giving too, right? Yeah. I mean, when you see it, and it's true. I guess the time, in other words, what you're saying is the time to really be concerned is when you don't care anymore.
That's the dangerous time. Yes.
You don't even care enough to fight or communicate or say anything that you feel deeply.
And it's interesting you said, and not even enough to communicate or fight. So the couples we're most concerned about are the ones that show up in therapy and say, yeah, we don't fight. we're just done. We've just both withdrawn. We've gotten into the withdrawn cycle. So what happens between couples is what Sue Johnson calls this demon dialogue, this cycle that, I mean, you could point the finger here or here, but it's just an infinitive loop that there's no one place to stop. And teaching you how to step out of that cycle so we don't get drawn into our fight cycle or our withdrawing cycle, how to restore ourselves after the cycle. And for me, I couldn't do this without the hope. So when I see that happen in couples, like people say, how do you listen to people's problems all day? Because I see hope. I see restoration.
Great question.
Yeah. I believe, I hope you have a therapist that believes in the general goodness of who we are as humans. And I believe most people desire to give love and receive love and not have maniacal or, evil intent. And in those cases, you see that bond happen. You see families change. You see marriages change. And you feel the sense of the Holy Spirit in the room. It's not all obviously what the therapist's doing. It's the work the couple does, and the work that the Holy Spirit comes in and does between us. And that's the only way. It gives me energy.
I think of the early days of ministry when I didn't have any staff, I had a part-time secretary, and I would sit for hours because people would ask for an appointment. And I would sit and do 30 minutes a day with different people over and, whatever they needed biblical counsel. So back then, the pastor was expected to do all of it.
Yeah.
And I can remember after a day of just nothing but appointment after appointment after appointment of this one's issue and this one and this one and this one, feeling so drained, like I could not hardly stand to go back in the next day and do that again. And yet, people need a pastor and they need somebody to talk to. So the pastor, though, cannot do that, sustain that kind of schedule long. I did for a long time. I mean, and Sharice would go with me. I would never meet with a woman, of course, without Sharice. And she was so bashful. This is I can tell this because this was 30 years ago. But she would sit behind on the couch, and the person would sit here, and she would be back there. And if they would say something, she would be mouthing to me. Tell them this, tell them that, but she wouldn't tell them. And so I don't know why. It made me think, though. I remember those early days of the need to have a counseling help and staff, or somebody that I could have referred the church people to. That did not exist back then. Or if it did, it was not in our world of spirit-filled or whatever you want to call our churches. It just didn't. It was almost seen as unspiritual.
Sure.
So how can we, let's say you got a church of 300, 400, 500, and it's growing and it's exciting, but people are needing counseling. How can let's take it back to you're the pastor now, and you know that there's needs and marriages in crisis and families in crisis. How would you build a counseling ministry in a church today?
Great question. So I would start with educating the congregation, educating on what is mental health, how to identify mental illness, talking about it in sermons or in messages.
How to identify mental illness, even in your own children or something.
And your own self. And
so
your
many
children.
Suicides now, so many addictions.
So many, and so needed, this connection between mental health and the church. The culture is just getting people. I mean, the culture is just going for our children and getting and destroying some of them.
Gender confusion.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. I actually had a very similar situation. Before I went to grad school, I was giving presentations and speeches to young adults on chastity, purity, not high schoolers. I can't play the guitar and do all that, but just my own journey and what I came through as a young adult. And I had people coming up asking me questions, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm over my head. Like, I do not know how to answer some of these things, particularly around gender confusion and all sorts of things. So I would say educate yourself, educate your congregation, know when to refer out for that pastor. I think you said it really well. It's not sustainable. You want to meet with them, you want to hear what's going on.
Yeah.
But the goal of that meeting could be to get you to the right people,
Right.
or to set a boundary of I'm going to meet 3 times, maybe,
Right.
so each person gets heard. And I would even say use your accountability and your authority to get them into therapy. I want to know you've called 3 people, or you've met, with a couple that you found. The other thing you can do is have.
Many times they don't have the finances.
Okay. Yeah.
Either. So I would encourage churches to budget resources for counseling. I really would. That is so critical.
Yeah.
And it sounds so, sure people would, but no, I didn't in the early years. I had so many other critical things, that just talk to somebody, pray about it, and you'll get better or something. And I'm not putting that down. How we believe that, but I do believe that it's almost impossible to have a successful church and not have a counseling ministry. By that I mean even if it's a referral. So again, help me.
Sure.
How do I build from the bottom up?
Yeah. So making sure everyone is aware and kind of getting that buy-in to get rid of the stigma. A lot of people in training, getting their training hours, so they've had a degree, but they don't have all the hours for licensing. They don't get paid or don't get paid very much. So it's a very inexpensive way where you could have interns or people on what they call practicum, kind of like a residency that like a medical doctor would do. You could have 4 or 5, 6 interns and only have to hire the one supervisor, like the one person that's there that's helping them. That would be an inexpensive way. There is certainly government facilities and government department. The Department of Mental Health also provides some low cost. There is lay ministers that you can train, particularly around identifying mental health.
Right.
And so if the pastor can't see everyone, then there's pastoral counseling. People can get that training. Many times people do that as part of their ministry. I think as I do, every good therapist should give away a percentage of their services, and I try to identify disadvantaged groups in order to do that. But asking therapists, do you do a sliding scale? Do you have a percentage of that you tithe your services? Those are all ways.
Yeah, and I think once you start it, you will realize the value that and especially if you do it quality. I think that's the key to just if you don't get, I would be very guarded at who I recommend, because if you don't get the right people, that's a serious thing, isn't it? Because if you don't send people to serious people who know what to do and how to handle it, that is sometimes their last reach.
Right.
And that's so important. So get quality, find quality. And I know you've mentioned, I know our good friend Dr. Tim Clinton and the counselors. I think you made reference to them. Nationwide Christian Counselors have a great organization, and of course Dr. Townsend and you. I don't know all about your organization or what you do and offer, but talk to us. I'm asking you. You didn't ask for this, and we didn't discuss this, but I trust you.
Sure.
And where would you lead people concerning how to build that structure? Because what will happen is if you can do it successfully, it will take care of itself. I love what you said about there's a lot of government money also that is now in a lot of insurance. I know our church insurance here at the church pays for mental health, counseling for people who need it. And our deal is let's make sure we give them biblical Christian counseling. I'm very prejudiced about that, I guess, because I know it's the best. I'm not saying the other isn't needed or we appreciate what they do, but we've got, I'm here, spirit, soul, and body.
Right.
The Apostle Paul said, we're spirit, soul, and body. And we talk about healing for the body, and we talk about salvation for the spirit, but nobody's talking about the mental health and soul. And also, we ought to be budgeting for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is part of the care for yourself, part of the care for the congregation. One of the biggest resources I can mention would be the Townsend Institute at Concordia.
So take a moment and just tell people how to connect with that.
Sure.
And we'll put it up under the screen if they're watching the YouTube or whatever, but those that are just listening in their car.
Yeah. So in terms of looking for a way to build this into your ministry for pastors specifically, would definitely take a look at the Townsend Institute at Concordia University. Lots of resources on how to integrate counseling and mental health into the church. Actually, I know Rick Warren's wife, Kay, is also doing a big initiative on mental health and the church, and he has resources.
They lost a son.
They lost a son to suicide, And actually, Dr. Townsend spoke at the church the weekend after they had lost their son.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And working with Dr. Townsend, we have something we call the Townsend Leadership Program, or TLP. You can also, take a look at that. I have an online group where I meet with pastors. I have an in-person group in Atlanta, but there's 20 or 30 of us directors across the country that you can also find online. This is a structured program that is for raising EQ of your pastors, but also showing them how to build in this element of mental health. When I said EQ, emotional intelligence, mental health and emotional intelligence, building it into their leadership style, building it into their staff, building it into the culture of their ministry, and what that would look like for how they would do like a counseling center.
So for those who have larger churches and have budgets that are more available, even making available to the staff counseling and for their marriages, it's time to quit pretending like ministry people are totally immune to any kind of marital diseases or anything else that can get a hold of their families or lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I love that. I love what you're saying. So you're saying you already have developed programs to help.
We are already developed a program because a need has been there.
To pastor the staff.
Absolutely. And then train the staff, then how to pastor, either the volunteers or the people working for them. I'll have all these resources again at my website, drmichellefleming.com. But yeah, its system is out there to step into exactly what people are wanting to do.
Well, I can't thank you enough for doing this today, and we appreciate, of course, the impact you've had on our lives and our church, because if you touch a pastor, you touch everyone that he has been given influence to try to reach, and that's a big deal.
And that's why pastors are under attack, as you know. That's why. So you need your army behind you. A lot of what we talk about at the Townsend Leadership Program, which is where we kind of started talking, was this isolation piece. The other piece is to get pastors together. So you're in the room really with people that understand it and through the trenches.
Boy, you're bringing up something now. We are working on that here that we hope that you'll have a big role in. But we're going to make an announcement next podcast.
Oh, wow.
About new breaking news on that level of getting pastors together. We had just threw a thing out there and said anybody who wants to come, especially pastors, and we had to limit it, I think, to maybe 60 couples or something like that, because it was the first time we'd ever done it. Mm-hmm. And we just had them come in and meet, and we hung out for a day and just talked shop and talked raw life, real life. And it was the most touching thing. These young couples and middle-aged couples and elders and whoever was welcome to come. And we stopped it at 60. We would have had many, many, many more. But it put in my heart and in Marcus's heart a desire to start gathering pastors.
Yeah.
And we have made a major investment toward that is going to be a work in action in the very near future. And we're going to start gathering pastors and their wives and pouring into them and bringing in people like yourself, hopefully, that will just really get down beyond the surface of stuff, down right where we need to be helped, and create a spirit, soul, and body wholeness atmosphere and place, even retreat, that lives can be transformed, hope and faith and love can be restored. So I'm pretty passionate about that because
Love it. Yeah, even Jesus didn't do it alone.
yeah,
I mean, he could have just risen and just shown up like he did with Paul, right?
Yep.
But he wanted a group, a team together that he was vulnerable with, that he
very
went to
good.
them when he was weary. He asked them, please stay awake with me for an hour in my anguish. Like he needed others. And so I think that is principled of how we support each other.
So good. He said to him one time, "Come apart," and let's. He said, "From the multitudes, come apart and rest
Yeah.
with me." And they went to the Sea of Galilee. They just got away. And I heard old preacher Bob Gass. He's gone on to be with the Lord, but he said, "If you don't come apart and rest with Jesus, you'll come apart."
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. And then after he was gone, they had each other.
It's very good.
To hold on, restore and talk through things. And you're not meant to do this alone. Yeah, you can't do this alone.
The book of Acts is nothing but partnerships.
Yeah.
Rarely do you see one guy going out as Paul and Silas, as Peter and John. It's teams, it's crews, it's people doing it together.
And all the messed up people were in twos too. If you read about Paul's enemies, he'd always Alexander the coppersmith, and it was so right relationships matter.
Huge.
So you get connected to the wrong person, it'll take you.
That's right.
And pastors are not exempt from that.
That's true.
We can find yourself around somebody that just is off and is not healthy.
Yeah.
And you can end up in a wrong place
It's
too.
a great point.
That's the idea of the group, that it's more than one,
Yeah.
right? So if your three other good friends are saying, hey, I think I see a problem here, others can see that sometimes when we can't. And
We've gone over, but that's worth talking about. Like, who's your crew? Who are
Yeah.
you? Who are you hanging out with? What kind of people? What is their value of marriage? What is their value of family? What is their value of integrity and character? And can we talk about that a minute?
Sure.
How do you? That is truly so important that you have people in your circle, your inner circle. It's not that you really have to guard your inner circle and make sure those people are the people that you really listen to.
yeah, absolutely. We call that at the Townsend Leadership Program a life team. And part of the goal of the program is that you form a life team, which is can be 4 to 6 people that when you call at 3 a.m., they're going to pick up the phone. It's people you can be real with. They're not inside your network. They're not tied to your church. You're not beholden to them or vice versa in any way. But you can be vulnerable with them,
good.
and they can be vulnerable with you. Yeah, really important.
That is excellent.
It's actually also the foundation, which we hadn't mentioned, of the 12-step programs and the groups that are out there. The support for Alcohol Anonymous. There's Emotions Anonymous. There's adult children of alcoholics. There's family members who are living with people that have mental illnesses, support groups.
Very good.
So one way to bring it in the church would be just to host one of those groups. Sometimes they're just looking for a place to meet. You don't have to do anything, but just be willing to open up the church in the evening and let the people come. And of course, they get to walk through the hall and see everything going on at your church. But that's another way to say, hey, we are open to this. And the support group element is huge, foundational.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's great.
I love that.
Well, I'll let you close us out, Marcus.
Well, thank you so much for answering the call. It's awesome.
Sure. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed this. It helped you, and we'll be doing